stage is yours.
All right. Well, I realize I'm the person standing between you and cocktail hour, so I'll try and keep this, if not brief, at least relatively on time. Hold on. Could someone advance the slide? Oh, wait. There we go. Maybe I was picking up the wrong clicker. Okay. There are three and only three things I'd like you to take away from this discussion. The first of which is that cybersecurity is truly becoming a commercial issue and is already starting to reshape value chains and interactions between suppliers and customers, sometimes in positive ways, sometimes in less than positive ways. Second, that this developed probably most rapidly in business-to-business markets, and business customers really do care in many sectors about security, and therefore companies participating in B2B markets need to build operating models and processes to sort of build trust with their customers and help them and not only protect themselves and protect their customers, but help their customers understand what they're doing to protect critical data and critical systems. And then finally, cybersecurity as we move to a more digital world and a more digital operating model with customers, security becomes a critical part of the consumer experience. One of the things that you do every time you interact with your bank, your telephone company, what have you, in order to conduct any sort of transaction, is you have to authenticate, which is a security process, which can be cumbersome or not. And therefore, companies need to put real time and effort to use design thinking in order to craft customer journeys and customer experiences which are both compelling and secure, because it's very easy to craft customer journeys which are neither. Let's see if I can successfully use the clicker. First thing I'd note is no company is an island when it comes to cybersecurity. They're constantly accepting sensitive data from customers. They're constantly transmitting sensitive data to suppliers. They're constantly interconnecting their technology environments, as Target found to its chagrin, with their customers and often with suppliers and often with large enterprise customers. So you have this interesting dynamic where a traditional technology-centric model for doing cybersecurity. Did you implement this control? Did you encrypt that? Did you put in place a secure network segment? Is sort of bumping up against the need for companies to trust one another around the data they share. Is creating turbulence in value chains. There's a few examples here that I think are interesting. If you talk with a software company CEOs, they'll say in many cases their sales cycle is doubled because they have to sell the product twice. First to the CIO or to the business owner, and then to the CISO. One specific example that I'm familiar with, a $100 million contract between an information service provider and one of its customers was held up for 13 months while the two companies sort of negotiated around security terms. And this is, I think, started out in technology and software, but has started to migrate into healthcare, into financial services and other industries. One of the other interesting examples is there was a mortgage-backed securities deal, quite large in nature, which involved, as part of the exchange of the securities, the personal data required to service the mortgages Unfortunately, no one could demonstrate how the third-party servicers were going to protect that data, holding up this large trade for several months. And the reason you're getting this turbulence is to succeed in a digital economy, we need two things. We need trust, which is not quite the same thing as protection. It's sort of protection plus the ability to communicate effectively around protection, right? And we need speed. And unfortunately, when people think about cybersecurity, they often think of these things as a trade-off, right? They'll say, okay, gee, we'll live with increased bureaucracy, we'll live with reduced speed by just increasing more controls and sort of shift going back and forth around an indifference curve between trust and speed. When we would argue instead, they need to sort of push that curve outward and find different ways of doing security. And we did a year-long research effort with the World Economic Forum around what's it take to be digitally resilient. We found there were 7 principles that were required to sort of shift the curve outward so you could increase trust and increase speed at the same time. The first of which is deeply understand which data is most important and which risks are most critical. And we'll see that this is important not only for you, but also for your, which risks and which data are most important to your customers as well. Change the behavior of frontline personnel so they understand, your employees understand the value of the data that they touch. Third, integrate security into your operational processes inherently, whether it's sales, servicing, mortgage, sales, servicing, authentication, what have you. Fourth, be prepared to respond to an incident across business functions. Not only the technical remediation, but be prepared to make the tough business decisions that happen after a breach. Fifth, build security inherently into technology environments. Sixth, get to fit for purpose protection. And then seventh, bring together intelligence and analytics in order to be able to tune defense mechanisms in real time. And what you'll see over on the right is we conduct, we measure how well companies are doing against each of these 7 principles. And you find in the aggregate score is not necessarily encouraging. And some of the weakest areas are things like the ability to build cybersecurity into the business and the ability to help employees understand the value of the data they're touching. So specifically, what do you need to do in B2B marketplaces? Many of my clients are absolutely swamped with what they, customer security audits, customer security inquiries, templates that need to be filled out for RFPs. And in one case, I have a client who deals with 1,200 of these interactions every year, and responding to customer requests taking up a third of all the effort for the security function. And here's an example of what the operating model often looks like, which is incredibly ad hoc, answers developed in manual fashion. Salesforce doesn't necessarily know where to go to. Different answers provided to different customers, or worst case, different answers provided to different business units of the same customer, which can get terribly ugly. So what to do about this? And I think there's several very concrete actions that companies should be taking. First of which is the customer audits and inquiries and questions that you get as a participant in B2B markets are an incredible source of data. They actually tell you what your customers care about from a security standpoint. And very rarely do you see companies sort of mining this to determine, okay, what are our clients asking us about from a security standpoint, and where are we strong versus weak? Second, there are real repeatable operating models that can be put in place where business unit information security officers or other people can be trained and can be armed with appropriate collateral to sort of educate the sales force so they can sort of shape the discussion around cybersecurity. And then finally, we see companies making real investments in knowledge management, which is to say every single time they get a question, there's a canonical answer that's developed, that's stored, that's recorded, and that's put in place so it can be accessed easily the next time something comes up. Obviously, in the best of all possible worlds, there would be a better way for companies to interact on security than to share questionnaires with one another. But in the short to medium term, there's a tremendous opportunity for companies to do a better job of addressing this issue, and in effect to shape how their customers think about security, and to reduce friction related to security from the sales cycle. Now, what should happen in B2B markets? And B2C markets. I argue this is fundamentally different, which is to say, it's easy to communicate with customers around security in a B2B market. You put it into an RFP response, you build it into a presentation. In contrast, it's much harder to communicate with consumers around security. You can't say we're more secure in a external advertising campaign. That only makes you a target. However, you have an obligation to consumers, and consumers increasingly care, though there's a lot of variety across consumer segments. Mass affluent cares more than other segments. Brokerage and financial services customers care more than people with credit card type products. Unfortunately, you see a lot of siloed activity around protecting consumers or protecting consumer customers. The cybersecurity team is not connected to the fraud team, and they're separately doing analytics. In many cases, the call center is not connected to cybersecurity, and business unit IT actually is in charge of customer authentication and is not working with the rest of the organization. And so as a result, you have increasingly sophisticated attackers able to look across all the points in a customer journey, and attackers are increasingly taking a customer journey view, and find the seams that that create risk. For example, engaging in a cyber attack to get certain types of credentials, using that to call into the call center, demonstrate that they're somebody that they actually aren't, and then engage the call center rep to reset the password with a different email, therefore allowing the attacker to take over an account. So what do we think companies should be doing about this? First of which, they need to create cross-functional teams across all the organizations I've just mentioned. Second, they need to map out security-related consumer journeys end to end. Third, they need to understand consumer preferences and behavior from a security standpoint. Some consumers are more sensitive than others. Some are more open to changes in a level of protection than others. Fourth, they need to apply design thinking in order to create customer experiences that are both convenient and secure. And I'll provide a very, very simple example of how this works. It's quite clear consumers are much less worried about someone inappropriately doing a balance inquiry on their account than they are in moving funds for obvious reasons. So some of the banks we've been working with have realized that they can have single-factor authentication at point of entry for the consumer, and then delay a second factor of authentication until the point where the consumer actually wants to move money or remove money from the account. It's a simple example, and when you think about it, somewhat obvious, but you'd be astonished by the number of banks around the world that don't apply this type of thought to consumer journeys related to security. And then the next frontier, which only a few banks start to do, will be around customization, which is say we all have different preferences on, we all have different preferences in terms of what we consider inconvenient. I might not be willing to accept a longer password, but to me, two-factor authentication is no problem. Somebody else always accesses his account from his laptop, so device fingerprinting is not inconvenient. So we're seeing some banks and some other institutions allowing consumers to customize their security experience. So they can't deselect all the security options, but they can select a bundle which gives a minimum level of protection, based on a certain number of points. And if they like, they could select all the protections. This has three positive impacts. First of which, it ensures that everybody is protected to a minimum level. Second, it engages consumers in security choices, and necessarily anything you engage in feels less convenient. And then finally, it allows consumers to make a set of choices that are convenient and make sense given their preferences and given their lifestyle. So, just to sum up, I would encourage all of you to avoid thinking about cybersecurity as an internally facing issue. In fact, as I said when on the panel earlier on today, I would make the case that the CISO and his or her team are probably the most market-facing of any function in technology, and therefore need to be deeply engaged with a number of different parts of the organization in order to help sales forces engage appropriately with their enterprise clients around security and to sort of communicate trust, and engage with fraud, product marketing, customer care, and other customer-facing functions in order to craft a set of customer journeys or consumer journeys which are both convenient and secure. And I would suggest to you, finally, that allows people to stop moving back and forth on the sort of trust and speed indifference curve and push that curve a little bit further from the origin so they can succeed in a digital world which requires both trust and speed. Thank you very much.